In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the master cylinder on the Chevy Silverado 2500 with the Hydro Boost Assist system. Let's get started. First, I'm going to try to remove as much of the brake fluid as I can from the master cylinder. That way there's less of a chance of stuff spilling. I'm going to use an extractor pump. This is just a little hand pump that you can apply vacuum with. That'll pull all of this fluid out into a little reservoir, and I can recycle it properly, and we can continue. Okay, I got pretty much everything here. So I'm going to get this out of here. Next, I want to unplug the level sensor, which is this right here. You'll need a pocket screwdriver to pry on the tab out. Just put the connector aside. Now I'm going to break free both of these lines. You'll need a 15mm wrench. I recommend a flare nut wrench because it grabs onto a couple extra sides. Break these free. Hopefully they're not rusty and stuck in place. I have an absorbent pad underneath here because no matter how much you drain that master cylinder, brake fluid will still leak, and I don't want it getting all over the place. So I'm just going to let it drain into that pad. Once you break these free, you can just use a regular wrench. That's fine. It's just for breaking it free. The regular wrench can strip them out. I'm going to back these off all the way. Try not to get brake fluid on the paint of the vehicle. I mean, really try not to get it on anything, but it does damage paint. It will basically melt it off, so try not to get it on there. Once you get these off, pull the second line out. Inspect your fittings, make sure they're in good condition and reusable. These are, as well as the lines. Nothing wrong here. So let's unbolt the master cylinder. To unbolt this master cylinder, you need a 15mm socket or a wrench. On the line side, you may or may not need a swivel, just so you can clear the lines and the fittings without any damage. Break the mounting nut free and remove it. Okay, set that aside. There's a little washer here. I'm gonna have to pick this off as well. With that off, let's do the same to the other side. Take the nut off. Looks like there's no washer on this side. If these studs unthread from the brake booster, you can thread them back in. They are reverse threaded though, so turn counterclockwise to tighten it back up. Now all we have to do is break the master cylinder free from the brake booster. Sometimes it's just stuck on because of corrosion. So wiggle it back and forth, maybe spray some rust penetrant in there. There is a little bit of an area to pry on at the top here. So I'm going to spray it down a little bit. Okay, there we go. Wiggle it back and forth, slide it straight out, and there it is. We're working with the Hydro Boost system here, so this is the hydraulically actuated power assist for the brakes, and that's why the brake booster looks a little different. Basically, I'm going to clean up the area here. It is fairly corroded, and I want the new master cylinder, when it goes in, I want it to go in smoothly and evenly. I threaded in this stud most of the way by hand. I'm going to do the same to this one. This power steering line is kind of in the way, so I'm going to move it to the side and then get this re-threaded back in so that when the mounting nut goes on, it's ready to go. I'm going to take a rag and just clean out this area a little bit better so I can inspect it. If you need to sand this down a little bit with a small piece of sandpaper, go ahead. Mine actually looks all right once it's cleaned up, so I might just leave it. Put a little bit of anti-seize on it so it doesn't corrode any further. Let's get the master cylinder reinstalled, line it up with the two studs, slide it all the way in, and put the mounting nuts back on. If you removed any of those washers, you do not have to put those on. Those are just from the factory, so the master cylinder doesn't fall off until the machine puts the mounting nuts on. I'm going to start them on both sides, tighten them up, and then torque them down. The torque for both of these mounting nuts is 24 foot-pounds. At this point, we need to bleed the master cylinder, bench bleed it. I know I didn't actually bleed it on a bench. I'm going to do it on the vehicle. You're going to need 2 adapters to go on these fittings here where the lines would go. So you don't want to push the lines aside like that. You can either make your own line, so buy some fittings, some copper brake line, it's easier to bend, and put it back up into the master cylinder, or you can use these universal plastic ones. The only thing you want to make sure is that they're the right fitting. You want to thread them on to the master cylinder. Don't tighten them up with a wrench or anything, just make them nice and snug by hand. That should be plenty tight. Do the same on the other one. Now open up the cap on the master cylinder, get these hoses in here, make sure they don't pop back out. If you need to weigh them down with something, put a pair of locking pliers here, don't crush them, but just enough to hold them in. These are staying in just fine. So at this point, let's fill this up with brake fluid all the way to the max line. And then instead of bench bleeding it, where you would pump the plunger in by hand, I'm just going to use the brake pedal and pump it that way. As it says on the cap, the system takes .3 brake fluid, so that's exactly what I'm going to fill it with. Once again, fill it all the way to the max line. You're going to need a whole lot of brake fluid for this, especially since you have to do a full brake bleed afterwards, so make sure you have plenty on hand. All right, we're pretty much at the max line, and at this point you want to make sure the ends of the hoses are dipped deep inside the brake fluid here, because when we push the brake pedal, that's going to push fluid in and through the hose. When you release it, it's going to want to pull back. So if it's not in the brake fluid, it's going to pull back air. The idea here is to pull back clean brake fluid every time you release the brake pedal. Also, when you do this, you want to go slow. Don't pump it fast. Go all the way to the floor very slow, then release very slowly, and eventually you should not see any more air come through. If you have a helper, that's even better because they can watch the hoses while you pump the brakes. If not, just come check them once in a while. All right, let's go in and pump and see what happens. I've pumped several times at this point without seeing any air bubbles. I'm going to pump one last time and see what happens. If it's clean, I'd say we're good to go. That is all the way to the floor. Oh, I see a little air bubble. All right, got to go again. You should not let any air in these lines, because if you do, it's going to cause a really spongy brake pedal. And the trick here is when you release, especially if you're using these plastic lines, is to go very, very slow, because the fittings themselves can pull air in. So that's it's not good. When you push, that's okay because there's positive pressure, but when you pull, it puts negative pressure, puts a little bit of a vacuum on the line, and if the fitting doesn't seal up 100%, that's when it's going to start leaking. Well, I'd say we're good to go here. Everything is bled, so I'm going to pull these lines off. I'm going to put the actual real lines on, and then I will do the same thing with this absorbent pad underneath with someone in the vehicle pumping the brake pedal. I'm going to crack these lines free, basically as if you're bleeding the caliper, except I'm going to bleed the line just to guarantee that after I pull these off, obviously air is going to make its way in, just to guarantee that there is no air going through these lines. After this, you will still need to perform a full manual brake bleed at all 4 wheels and flush the entire brake system. So I'm going to show you how to do that, but you also want to bleed the lines here. Having said all that, let's get the bleeder lines out. They will leak, so make sure you have something to absorb the fluid here. Obviously, they're full of fluid. Okay, there's one. Okay, Master cylinder is leaking, of course. So I'm going to cap this off, get ready to put this line in. It's not letting me because of that other fitting. Okay. Quickly get this fitting connected and snugged up. I'm going to grab my 15mm wrench and just snug this up so it stops leaking. The fact that it leaked while I was tightening is actually a good thing, because that means it pushed out any potential air. Obviously still crack the line free and bleed it, but if it leaks a little bit while you're tightening it, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's do the same to this one over here. Make sure that at all times the master cylinder stays full. If you run it dry, you're going to have to do the whole process all over again of bleeding it. Okay, get ready to put the line in. Quick. You got to be quick on this one. If you haven't figured that out, it's a messy job. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath the vehicle to catch all the brake fluid you're going to lose. Snug this line as well. All right, so now they're both snug. I'm not going to bother cleaning anything up yet because we're about to crack the lines free, put some pressure on them, and make sure there's no air in there. I'm going to, however, swap my absorbent pads because these are pretty much done. I'm going to once again top off the master cylinder so I can start with a full master cylinder. Now I'm going to get an assistant to pump up the brake pedal for me so I can crack the lines and bleed any excess air out of the lines. All right, so I have an assistant in the vehicle. I have my wrench ready. We're going to start with this fitting over here. Go ahead and pump a couple times. All right, holding pressure, crack it a little bit. Okay, we're getting clean fluid, no air. It's perfect. I'm going to close it up. Snug it, let go, and pump again. Let's do the rear. Okay, crack the other line free. Did not see any air out of this one, so we're going to close it back up. Snug this up. Okay, let go. Pump it up, see if it builds good pressure. All right, we are all set here. I'm going to top this back off with clean brake fluid. Make sure it's at the full line, right about here. I'm going to obviously put this cap back on. We have to plug in the level sensor again, so don't forget about that. If you forget about it, you'll have a brake light on the dash. And now is the time to clean everything up. I'm going to remove this so that the brake parts cleaner that I spray can actually run down where the brake fluid ran down as well. Clean everything at once, spray it all down. You don't want to confuse the residual brake fluid for a brake fluid leak. At this point, you would do a full manual brake bleed, flush out those lines, and make sure you have a good pedal. If you do not, after you bleed the brakes, you're going to have to bleed the ABS module as well, because that means you left air in these lines and it has gone through and most likely got stuck somewhere on the line. However, if you're 100% certain that you bled all of the air out of these, just a manual brake bleed will do the trick. Make sure you have a good brake pedal. Test the truck out, make sure it stops properly. You should be good to go. Now I'm going to show you how to do the manual brake bleed. Okay, there we go. That's pretty much at the max line right here. You can see the fluid level. I will put the cap back on just so moisture doesn't make its way into the brake fluid. Brake fluid is hydroscopic, so it will absorb the moisture. Also cap off your brake fluid reservoir. On this particular truck, the sequence will be starting at the right rear wheel, so that's the passenger rear wheel, then moving on to the left rear, driver's side rear, then the right front, that's the passenger's front, and finally ending with the driver's side front wheel. If you feel that you need to repeat the procedure, go ahead and do that. I will do it once. It should be good for us. So let's start at the right rear wheel. Now, like I said, right rear wheel first. I have this reservoir with a hose on it. I recommend this because it helps you visualize the quality of the fluid as well as any air bubbles coming out. I also have a 10mm wrench ready to crack the bleeder screw open. So I'm going to put this hose on. I also have an assistant in the vehicle ready to pump up the brake pedal. You need to build up pressure in the system, and then after a few pumps, have the assistant hold pressure on the brake pedal to force the fluid out of the bleeder screw as you open it up. Go ahead and pump. I'm going to crack this bleeder screw free. As you can see, fluid is coming out. You don't need to open this a lot, just a little bit. And as soon as the pedal has reached the floor, go ahead and close this off. And we're going to repeat this process until we have no more air bubbles coming out. Go ahead and pump again. All right, let's do it one more time. That was the first clear flow. Let's do it one last time just to be safe. Go ahead and pump. All right, that is nice and clear a couple times in a row. You can let go of the brake pedal now. This is what I like to see. If you still have air bubbles after several cycles, continue bleeding it because you do not want air trapped in here. Now that I'm done, I'm going to remove my hose here. I'm going to tilt this down just so that the brake fluid can go into the collection receptacle and not spill. Once this is done, clean any debris off, and if your caliper still has the little boot, go ahead and pop it on. Unfortunately, it looks like this one is missing, so I can't cap it back off. Now let's move to the left rear wheel. Between each caliper, top off the brake fluid in the master cylinder, or at least check it to make sure that it is still close to the max line. Of course, it is better to just top it off and keep it full. You don't want to run it dry. Now we're at the left rear, that's the driver's side rear wheel. This one does have one of these little boots, so I'm going to pop that off, get my receptacle hose connected here, 10mm wrench ready. Go ahead and pump, please. All right, crack this free. Yeah, got some air on that one. Go ahead and pump again. Okay. All right, let's do it a couple more times. Go ahead and pump. Nice and clear. Brake fluid is getting a little bit lighter, so I know I'm getting some fresh fluid through the line. You can release the brake pedal now. This caliper is successfully bled. The second one on the rear usually goes a little bit faster because the line, like I said earlier, was already cleared from bleeding the other side for quite a while. Make sure that this is tightly closed. Put this cap off if you had one. Clean any brake fluid off if you spilt it. And now let's move to the passenger side front wheel. That would be the right front. All right, here we are at the right front. I'm going to get my hose on, 10mm wrench ready. Go ahead and pump, please. Okay, holding pressure. I'm going to release this. Ooh, that was some dark brake fluid to begin with. There we go. Close this off. Go ahead and pump again. Okay, that is nice and clean. All right, you can release the brake pedal now. I did make a little bit of a mess here, so I'm going to take some brake parts cleaner and clean it up. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath. Rinse off your brake fluid so that you don't confuse it for a potential leak. There we go. Cap it off with that little rubber boot if you still had one. Okay, left front caliper. This is the driver's side front. This is our last one. Go ahead and pump up the brake pedal. Okay. All right, go ahead and pump again. All right, let's do it one more time. I'm not seeing any air out of this. clean fluid, no air. So at this point, you can release the brake pedal. I'm confident that this caliper is bled. Let's clean up our mess here. Quite a bit of it leaked, as you can see, so it's important to have a collection bucket underneath to catch it in case of any leakage. I did have a little bit of spillage here, so I'm going to take some brake parts cleaner and clean it all up, make sure it's nice and dry. You do not want to confuse this for a brake fluid leak in the future. It would be very dangerous if you actually had one. Now, top off the master cylinder again, make sure it's nice and full. There we go, all the way to the max line. Make sure you put the cap back on so it doesn't get any moisture in it.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.